This is my audience for my speech. Everyone knows that America's sex education is lacking in many ways, many of which that I talked about in my last speech. What you likely don't know is the state of other countries' sex ed programs. How do they relate to ours? Unsurprisingly, their programs are largely much better. Take Denmark, for example. In a 2015 article published on PBS called "The Case for Starting Sex Education in Kindergarten," it shows that Dutch teenagers will use contraception 9 out of 10 times during their first time, that Denmark's teen birth rate is one of the lowest in the world, and that most Dutch teenagers would say their first time was a wanted and fun experience. Clearly, they're doing something right. Their sexuality education, as they call it, is different from ours in almost every way. For one, they start in kindergarten talking about good and bad touch and parts of the body. As they get older, they talk about topics like sexual orientation, reproduction, and safe sex. In high school, they talk about sexually transmitted diseases, contraception, and setting boundaries for intimacy. While it may unnerve some parents to think about their children being taught sex ed at such a young age, I hope to show how it can and does work appropriately. The United States should use Denmark as a basis for their sex education programs, especially in the areas of consent, relationships, and sexual intercourse and health. The first topic that Denmark covers correctly is consent. It's the first thing they're taught in kindergarten and the last thing they're taught in high school. It's integral to sex ed in a way that it isn't in America. Of course, it's taught differently when the kids are 4 than when they're 14. When they're younger, it's focused more on what kind of touch they're comfortable with and respecting other people's boundaries. They learn how to communicate what they do and don't want. Connected to this, they also learn about body parts and their functions. In the same article from PBS, it talks about how students will draw boys' and girls' bodies, tell stories about friends having a bath together, and discuss who likes doing that and who doesn't. Having a discourse like this at a young age not only gives them an understanding of consent, but gives them a basic consideration for other people's feelings. Older students will learn about this in more detail. Most middle and high schools in Denmark use a program called Long Live Love. On the official website for this program, in the students section of the secondary education information, it shows a version of what's taught in schools about consent. In it, it talks about how to communicate before and during sex. In talking about sex with such openness, Denmark does exactly the opposite of what limits America's programs. It makes it safer for all parties when involved when everyone knows about their boundaries. The second topic they talk about correctly is relationships. From a young age, Dutch children are taught about what love is and how it can be expressed in different ways. They'll sing songs about having a crush, learn about what being in love is like, and learn how to break up with someone respectfully. In a YouTube video from PBS's official website titled "Dutch 11-Year-Olds Get a Lesson in Love," it shows an instructor talking about just this. She also talks about what people act like when they're in love. Students talk about how they act more shy or smile more when they're around someone they love. For older students, it delves more into communication with your partner in sexual situations and not. Consent and relationships are very intertwined in high school. In the same section from Long Live Love that the information about consent was present, it talks about men and women's desires and the similarities and differences. Once again, Denmark talks about something that the U.S. ignores. Women have sexual desires and men aren't constantly driven by theirs. They also reiterate the point about intimacy and how you need to communicate when you do and don't want it. Another topic they talk about is sexual orientation. While in the U.S. it can be banned to talk about same-sex relations, in Denmark it's talked about early and often. Although it doesn't become part of the official curriculum until the students are older, the instructors are free to talk about it whenever it's brought up. In talking about it so casually, it makes it safer for LGBTQ+ students to be themselves. Now on to the most controversial part of sex education in the United States, sexual intercourse and health. Teaching children about sex would get the most pushback if we were to try and implement this system in the United States. However, I think it's important to destigmatize sex early in life. It's a natural topic and should be treated as such. There have been many Dutch children's books that have been published and translated into English for us to look at as examples. One such book is How a Baby is Made by Per Holm Knudsen in 1975. In it, it tells the story of a mother and father having sex and making a baby. This book is one of many used all over Europe to teach children about the basics of sex, and consent, and also contraception and safe sex. Older kids, since they already know the basics, are taught about STDs and regular STD testing. Long Live Love's website has two official sections over both of these topics. In it, it talks about STDs in both calm and factual terminology, avoiding unnecessary fear about the topic. Doing this achieves what the U.S. doesn't, because their focus on abstinence can leave talk about STDs lacking. In summary, sexuality education in Denmark is superior to America's in every way. It focuses on topics that the U.S. ignores, like same-sex relations, consent, relationships, and STD testing. It doesn't shy away from talking about reproduction from children at a young age. It presents sex as a natural thing. It respects its teens to make smart and safe decisions about intimacy. It also relates sex to love and relationships so students of all ages can understand it. If I had to choose between Denmark's sexuality education and the United States sex education, I would choose Denmark's every time.